Dorian had learned early on from his father the art of manipulating people, gaining their trust and using it to get what he wanted. He had a talent for the con, and as he stepped onto the pier, he immediately spotted an ideal target. The man, impeccably dressed, too fine for the Southampton docks, was accompanied by a wealthy-looking woman, undoubtedly his mother, along with a group of servants carrying their luggage. They seemed like they could be from London, possibly minor royalty. The sheer amount of baggage they carried suggested they might be leaving England for New York. Dorian was adept at being whoever he needed to be to pull off his schemes. As a confidence man, he could assume any role to carry out a con. His gift for reading people helped him discern what mattered most to them, which he could then use to dissolve any doubt they might have. As he watched the man and his mother, he quickly figured them out. The man, Rory, was likely gay, based on his slight flamboyance. His suit, although luxurious, had small, telling details. The woman, undoubtedly his mother, displayed a clear mix of frustration and concern toward him. As they waited at the first-class gangway, she wasted no time in pointing out his every fault. Dorian moved through the crowd, closing the distance to listen. It wasn't long before Rory struck up a conversation with a handsome young steward, and Dorian could see the attraction was mutual. However, the mother soon intervened, effectively breaking up the exchange. "Rory, for heaven's sake, stop chatting with the crew. It's what's caused all this trouble," she said, her tone full of irritation. "Yes, Mama," Rory sighed, pulling out his cigarette case. Dorian quickly surmised that Rory's behavior had created such a scandal in London that they were likely fleeing to New York to start fresh and possibly find him a suitable, though likely phony, bride. He's as good a mark as any, Dorian thought. And first class will be a much more comfortable way to cross the Atlantic. Dorian, traveling alone, had booked a second-class ticket, preferring to save his money. He had 8 days before they reached New York, plenty of time to become an indispensable companion to Rory. After embarking, Dorian spent the first half-day familiarizing himself with the ship and making a plan. Using his skills, he forged the necessary documents to move freely in the first-class areas, gaining access to dining rooms and decks. The next morning, as breakfast was being served, Dorian spotted Rory entering the dining room alone. Dorian seized the opportunity, casually circling the room and purposefully bumping into him. "Sorry about that," Dorian said with a thick, faux-eaten accent. "Not at all," Rory replied. "One's balance is never assured aboard ship, is it?" "Quite right. Still, let me make it up to you. Would you join me for breakfast?" "I'll make up for my clumsiness with some good conversation," Dorian offered smoothly. "That would be lovely," Rory responded, brightening. "I'm Rory Alcott." "Dorian Montgomery, a pleasure," said Dorian. The two hit it off immediately, and they conversed for over an hour after their meal. Rory was openly flirtatious, and Dorian, ever the opportunist, returned the favor. He had no qualms about pretending to be interested in a man to manipulate him. There was always the option of blackmail if it came to that. Before they parted, Rory invited Dorian to dinner that evening. "Of course," Dorian replied. "Your mother will be there too, I presume, so it might not be as lively, but I think we'll still have a good time." "Excellent. See you at 8. That evening, Dorian arrived in full white tie and with a flourish, his coat-tails swaying as the porter held his chair. Rory and his mother, Lady Alcott, were already seated. Lady Alcott studied Dorian throughout the dinner, quickly picking up that something was off. She could tell he was pretending to be someone he wasn't, though Rory seemed blind to it. She found him charming enough, but as the evening wore on, she held her judgment, waiting to see what Dorian might reveal about himself. Despite his lack of morals, she was intrigued. After dinner, she retired to her suite while the men went for drinks and cigars. Even the most well-laid plans can hit unexpected snags. Dorian hadn't anticipated that Lady Alcott would be such an early riser. As he tried to quietly slip out of Rory's room the next morning, he was caught off guard when he found her waiting for him in the suite's parlor. "I see it was a late night, Mr. Montgomery," she remarked, her voice startling him. Dorian turned to face her, still half-dressed and without his jacket or shoes on. She set her teacup back in the saucer as she observed him. "Lady Alcott, good morning," he replied, trying to sound as cheerful as possible. His mind raced, scrambling for an excuse. His eyes caught sight of a small gold pendant around her neck, a triquetra, the symbol of the Trinity. He took note, finding it interesting. "That's a lovely pendant, Lady Alcott," he said, his tone warm. She slid it beneath her dressing gown, out of sight, and gave him a curt response. "Good morning to you as well. I trust you slept well?" Her tone was all business, and it made Dorian wary. He would need to be careful. She rose from her seat, placing the teacup on a nearby table. Dressed in her robe, she seemed at ease, though it was likely she was expecting servants to be about, which made her presentable despite the informality. Taking a steadying breath, she spoke again, her words more of a command than a suggestion. "Sit and have tea with me, won't you?" "Certainly, ma'am," he said, offering a slight bow. Lady Alcott moved to the sideboard, where she retrieved a small bag from the tea caddy. He watched as she filled a silver tea strainer with leaves before returning the bag to its place. She poured hot water over the strainer, letting the leaves steep, and brought the tea over to the table. "Sugar?" she asked, looking at him expectantly. "No, thank you, ma'am," he replied. "Good boy," she responded with approval, before indicating the chair opposite her. "Now, take a seat." He sat, and she placed the freshly brewed tea in front of him after removing the strainer. She sat down with her own cup, and they both lifted their teacups. "To your health," she said coolly. "And to yours," Dorian replied, doing his best to remain cheerful. They sipped their tea in silence for a moment, and to Dorian's surprise, it was the best tea he'd ever had. He made a mental note to ask about the blend, assuming he made it through the conversation. Lady Alcott broke the silence. "It seems my son is quite fond of you," she began. "What exactly are your intentions with him?" The directness of the question caught him off guard, though it didn't surprise him given her blunt nature. She clearly didn't suffer fools, and Rory's near 30 years of trouble had likely worn her patience thin. "I'm afraid I don't quite follow, ma'am," he responded, genuinely perplexed. She paused, letting the silence stretch, before continuing. "My son has many admirable qualities, but choosing his friends doesn't seem to be one of them." Dorian took another sip of the tea, deciding to remain silent for the time being. The tea was so good that he hardly noticed how much of it he'd drunk. After a few moments of quiet, Lady Alcott spoke again. "I wonder if you might allow Rory to spend the day with me? We have much to discuss, and his attention tends to wander elsewhere. Would you do that for me?" Dorian finished his cup, nodding. It seemed like a reasonable request. Besides, given Rory's flirtations the night before, Dorian wasn't concerned. Rory would find him again soon enough. Lady Alcott noticed his empty cup. "Another?" she asked, and before he could respond, she was already rising. She repeated the process, preparing another cup of tea, and handed it to him. He accepted graciously, taking another sip. "So, we're agreed?" she asked, as if it were settled. "You'll allow me the day with him, and we'll reconvene for dinner?" "Certainly, Lady Alcott," Dorian replied. "I look forward to seeing you both at dinner." "Very good," she said. "We'll have drinks here in the suite at 7 o'clock sharp." Dorian noted the time and smiled. He did enjoy the cocktail hour before dinner. They sat in silence for a moment before Lady Alcott spoke again. "Finish your tea and be on your way. I have a full day ahead of me." Dorian smiled back. Under different circumstances, he might have found her more agreeable. He drained the last of his tea and set the cup and saucer down. Rising, he bid her a good day and left the suite, stepping into the first-class hallway. As he walked back to his cabin, he realized he'd forgotten to ask about the tea blend. Never mind, he thought to himself. I'll ask at dinner. It had been a long night, and Dorian had barely slept. Rory, despite all his talk, had just kept rambling on, keeping him awake until the early hours. If it weren't for the man's wealth, Dorian would have given up and returned to his cabin. But no, he reminded himself, it was worth the effort. So, he let Rory chatter away, and eventually, they both drifted off to sleep just as the morning light began to break. When he returned to his cabin, Dorian had no trouble falling asleep for the rest of the day. The tea heat had earlier seemed to have a calming effect, and he knew he'd be out as soon as his head hit the pillow. True to his expectation, he woke up late in the afternoon, feeling a strange cramp in his lower stomach. He hadn't drunk much the night before and hadn't eaten since dinner, so he wasn't sure if it was hunger or something he'd eaten disagreeing with him. He rose from the bed, feeling a bit wobbly, and went to the restroom before returning to lie down again. His body ached slightly, but he chalked it up to the poor mattress and the long travel. He had planned to get up and walk the deck to look for another mark, but he found it more comfortable to just lay back down. Before long, he drifted off again. He was jolted awake by the dimming light in his room. His stomach still felt uneasy, and his body ached slightly, almost as if it were sore. He glanced at his watch, 6:45 p.m. Panic surged through him, he was going to be late. He quickly jumped out of bed. He scrambled to get dressed, finding a freshly pressed shirt and tailored pants, with his tailcoat neatly hung nearby. Even his shoes were polished, a service he hadn't expected from his cabin class. He put on the pants, noting they felt a bit off around the hips and rear. The shirt's starched bib front seemed a little too large for him, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. He slicked his hair back, noticing it looked fuller and thicker than he remembered. "I'll see the barber tomorrow," he thought. He was surprised to find that he didn't need to shave, his face was perfectly smooth. "Never mind," he muttered, quickly fastening his starched collar and tying his white tie. Still tucking in his shirt, he walked briskly toward the Alcott suite. As he moved, he felt odd, more aware of his chest and waist than usual. His tailcoat seemed too big, the sleeves reaching past his wrists. "They must have given me the wrong suit when they pressed everything," he thought, continuing his walk toward their room. He knocked on the door at exactly 7 p.m., feeling self-conscious as he waited. Rory opened it after his third knock, with a butler standing behind him, looking displeased. "Dorian, old boy. Glad you could join us," Rory greeted him warmly. "We'll be dining here in the suite tonight, despite the captain's invitation. Hope that's all right with you?" "Not at all," Dorian responded, his voice sounding unusually high. He cleared his throat as he entered the suite. Rory led him toward his mother, and Dorian couldn't help but notice that Rory seemed taller and more handsome than the previous evening. Lady Alcott was sitting in the same chair he had seen her in earlier, now wearing a luxurious dark green velvet and lace evening gown. "Mother, Dorian Montgomery has joined us," Rory announced. "Lady Alcott, how do you do this evening?" Dorian squeaked, taking her gloved hand and kissing it. He cleared his throat again, feeling awkward. "I seem to have an odd frog in my throat," he muttered to himself. Lady Alcott smiled at him, her expression both amused and slightly teasing. "You look positively glowing, Mr. Montgomery. Did you take some sun today?" Dorian sputtered. "Not at all, ma'am. I was so tired from the journey. I dare say I slept most of the day." Rory smiled politely. "Yes, traveling does odd things to the body, doesn't it? Would you care for a cocktail?" Dorian glanced at Lady Alcott, who still wore a broad smile. "Perhaps some tea, for my voice before dinner," he croaked. Lady Alcott's smile widened. "An excellent idea. I think I know just the one you'd like, Mr. Montgomery," she said with a wink. Dorian didn't know if Rory had overheard their conversation earlier, but he was grateful for the tea. Despite the butler's protest, Lady Alcott insisted on making the tea herself while Rory regaled Dorian with stories of his day. Before he had finished, she handed Dorian a cup of tea, warmer than before. "I've made it a bit stronger, Mr. Montgomery." It should help sort you out more quickly, she said, studying him intently. Thank you, Lady Alcott, Dorian managed, still trying to clear his throat. This really is rather silly, he thought, taking a deep sip of the tea. It hit the spot, soothing his throat and making him feel a bit more himself. Rory continued his animated monologue as they settled into their seats. Lady Alcott was served a glass of sherry, while Rory sipped his dry martini, all the while continuing to chatter about his day. Dorian sat with the cup and saucer in his lap, sipping the wonderful tea as he listened, though the words around him blurred into background noise. Soon, a wave of drowsiness hit him, and his stomach began to ache again, sharp pangs this time. Hoping the tea would soothe the discomfort, he drank the last of it, but the pain only worsened. Rory's endless rambling became a distant hum as Dorian's focus began to slip. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as the pain spread, his hips and shoulders throbbing once again. Soon, it felt as though his ribs were being constricted, and the fatigue threatened to overwhelm him. I wonder, Dorian started, his voice higher than usual, if I might be, excuse me. His words trailed off as darkness crept into his vision, and he slumped in his chair, the cup and saucer teetering dangerously in his lap. The soft rays of morning sunlight filtered through the wide windows of the first-class cabin's bedroom. Dorian could immediately tell something was wrong. His body felt strange even before he opened his eyes. He shifted in bed, stretching his legs, and felt an unfamiliar piece of clothing brushing against them. Groggily, he cracked an eye open and saw Rory sitting next to the bed, wearing a paisley silk robe, a cup of tea in hand. The clock on the desk behind him read 7:30. Good morning, my love, Rory said softly, a sincere smile on his face. You look lovely this morning. I brought you some tea. Dorian rubbed his eyes, but something didn't feel right. His hands felt wrong, smaller, thinner. Looking down, he saw a delicate woman's hand attached to a slender arm, and the realization hit him like a shockwave. He bolted upright, long hair cascading around his face. He pushed the hair aside, panic rising in his chest as he inspected his other hand, finding the same unsettling sight. His gaze moved up his arms, and then his eyes fell on the white frilly lace of a cotton nightgown that covered his unfamiliar, fuller chest. His brain struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. The weight of his chest pressed against him, and instinctively, he reached up to touch them. Dorian had been with many women, but feeling his own chest in his hands was a jarring, perverse shock. What is going on?" he gasped, his voice coming out high-pitched and unfamiliar. "Why am I dressed like this? Why am I in this bed?" "It's all right, my love," Rory replied smoothly, clearly unfazed by the situation. "You fell asleep early last night. Rather than carry you back to your cabin, we thought it best to let you rest here. Mother said it wouldn't be a problem. Traveling does strange things to the body, doesn't it?" He smiled softly, his tone soothing. "Do you feel better after your rest?" Dorian did feel rested, but everything else was completely off. Still squeezing his own chest in disbelief, the thought hit him, there had likely been more changes. More dramatic ones. His posture felt awkward, and as he sat, he realized something was even more wrong. His body, lower down, wasn't what he expected. Desperate, he reached down to feel for the part of him that should have been there, but was now missing. He pulled the covers back, lifted the hem of the nightgown, and found his cotton drawers underneath. "Darling, please," Rory objected, turning his face away as Dorian exposed her undergarments in a rather unladylike manner. Dorian ignored him, pulling the drawers down to inspect further. The soft curve of his feminine pubic area greeted his touch, and he gasped in horror. Oh my God," he whispered, his voice a confused, high-pitched tremor. "What have you done to me, Reggie?" "What do you mean, darling?" Rory asked, glancing back despite himself. "Please, darling, pull your nightgown down. It's not decent." Dorian swung his legs out of bed, his tiny feet hitting the floor with a soft thud as he stood. The nightgown slid to his ankles, and his long hair fell around his face again. Everything in the room seemed just slightly too large. What did you do to me, Reggie? I'm a woman, he half-screeched, pulling the long hair away from his face in disbelief. Rory stood, placing his tea down, and walked over to her. He gently embraced her, further confusing Dorian. Of course you are, darling, Rory said with a soft smile. And I love you so much. Please, here's your tea. Let's have breakfast and talk about today. We've got wedding plans to discuss. Wedding? What are you talking about, Rory? Dorian pushed him away, panic flooding her. Good God, man. Pay attention. I'm a woman now, she exclaimed in a surprisingly feminine voice. Yes, Mother said you might be a bit off this morning, Rory said gently. Please, let's get you dressed and join Mother for breakfast. She can explain everything. By God, she'll explain right now, Dorian muttered, storming toward the door. She threw it open. As expected, Lady Alcott was sitting in her usual spot, sipping her morning tea. She looked up at Dorian with a broad smile, one that seemed to hold a touch of triumph. Good morning, Miss Montgomery. Don't you look radiant this morning? Lady Alcott said, sipping her tea once again. What in God's name have you done to me? Dorian fumed, his voice now a soprano pitch. He walked directly toward her and stood just a bit too close, not quite looming as he had expected, now that he was shorter and more petite. Please, Miss Montgomery, that's no way for a lady to behave, Lady Alcott replied coolly. And could you please put on some clothes? I won't speak with you while you're sauntering around in such a state. Apologies, Mother, Rory said, stepping behind Dorian with a cream-colored satin dressing gown. Here you are, darling, he added, helping Dorian slip her arms into the robe. Dorian allowed Rory to wrap the gown around her, and once it was securely tied, she turned her attention back to Lady Alcott. Well, out with it. What have you done to me? Dorian demanded. Please, have a seat. Let's have some tea, and I'll explain. Would that be satisfactory? Lady Alcott gestured to the chair opposite her. Dorian sat, and Lady Alcott set her cup and saucer aside. She began preparing a fresh cup of tea for Dorian, spooning some leaves into a silver strainer before pouring hot water over them slowly. Once finished, she removed the strainer and placed the cup before Dorian. Sugar? She asked, eyeing Dorian. No thank you, Dorian replied. Good girl, Lady Alcott commented approvingly as she slid the cup across the table. Dorian took the cup and saucer, settling back into her seat. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, and sipped the tea. It was a different blend from the day before, but equally delicious. She quickly took another sip, feeling the warmth settle in. There now. Isn't that better? How do you feel now? Lady Alcott asked with a slight smile. Rory sat down beside her, watching Dorian expectantly. The tea seemed to work as Lady Alcott had promised. Dorian felt a wave of tranquility wash over her, and she relaxed into the moment. I feel better, Dorian replied, her mood lifting. The tea is helping, actually. I feel so much more at ease. She smiled at Rory, who smiled back at her. She blinked, noticing how handsome he looked in his silk robe. Her heart fluttered, and she blushed, feeling inexplicably drawn to him. She nervously took another sip of the tea, confused by the feelings surging within her. Well, I'm certainly glad to hear you're feeling better, Lady Alcott replied, her smile widening with a hint of mischief. Ladies really shouldn't be quite so animated in their conversations, dear. It's unseemly. Remember that. You've changed me into a woman, haven't you, Lady Alcott? Dorian stated, the realization dawning on her. I saw your necklace. It's a coven symbol. You've somehow turned me into a woman so that I can marry your son, Rory, haven't you? Yes, dear, you're quite clever, Lady Alcott said with a knowing smile. I have indeed done that. You see, Rory was quite the dandy, I must say, and he was perversely in love with men. I tried many times to cure him of this affliction while we were in London, but without my spells, I was unsuccessful. You see, our spells are forbidden in London. That's why I had to bring him to America, where I could make a proper gentleman out of him. Once he was married and produced an heir, he could return to London and chalk up his previous behavior to youthful folly. I didn't plan for you to join in my little scheme, Miss Montgomery, but it was just as easy to make you his bride as it would have been any other woman. Besides, I believe your skills of manipulation will come in handy in the new world. Have you yet explained to Rory that you are a confidence man? Rory looked confused, glancing between the two women. Oh, Rory, darling, you can be a bit slow at times, can't you? Lady Alcott said with a teasing smile. Dorian Montgomery was only interested in you for your money. Her plan was to get close to you and swindle you somehow. Really, darling, you must pick your acquaintances more carefully. Still, your bride-to-be has many useful skills, and I suspect New York won't know what hit them, she added, taking another sip of her tea. But I'm in love with Rory too. How did you do that? Dorian asked eagerly, shocked at her own words but excited to understand how it had all happened. Why, with the tea you're holding in your lap, my dear. Just a simple love potion, very strong, and permanent, I should add. I gave some to Rory as well. I dare say he won't be having any more dalliances with the gentlemen of London or New York from this point forward. He'll only have eyes for you, my dear, as he should. Rory reached his hand over to Dorian, who eagerly took it in hers. The two locked eyes, and the spell was complete. I love you so much, my darling, Rory said with a soft, loving smile. Oh, and I love you too, Rory. I don't understand how this happened, but I'm so happy right now. I love you with all my heart, my darling Rory. If this is how I have to be with you, then I can't wait to be Mrs. Rory Alcott. The two of them sat quietly, gazing at each other, before Lady Alcott broke the silence. Do finish your tea, both of you, just to be sure, she said softly. They both finished their tea and set their cups and saucers back on the table. For the rest of the journey, the couple was inseparable. Dorian, now renamed Daphne at Lady Alcott's suggestion, was completely smitten with Rory. They insisted the captain marry them at sea. Initially, Lady Alcott protested, but Daphne cleverly explained how they could handle the mysterious appearance of a woman who seemingly came out of nowhere. They agreed that it was better to arrive in New York as Mr. and Mrs. Alcott, and so Dorian Montgomery was quietly erased from existence, his belongings tossed into the sea, with a few small trinkets left behind. Daphne grew closer to Lady Alcott, eagerly learning all things feminine from her new mother-in-law. Fortunately, Daphne was now closer in size to Lady Alcott, so there was an abundance of clothing for her to try on and wear around the ship. The corsets were uncomfortable at first, but Rory loved how they shaped her figure, and Daphne loved making him happy. However, she realized she would need a lady's maid to manage her long hair, as she had never learned the skill herself. By the end of the voyage, Daphne couldn't imagine not wearing the beautiful dresses and gowns Lady Alcott provided. She was especially pleased with the large hat and day dress she wore when leaving the ship for New York. The newlywed couple, along with Lady Alcott, disembarked in New York and began their new lives in society. Daphne Alcott, formerly Dorian Montgomery, quickly became a hit with the women of New York society, drawing them in with her charm and depth of connection, this time, not for personal gain, but for the benefit of her new family. With Daphne's unique talents, Rory started an import and export business that proved highly successful for generations. At Daphne's urging, they had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and after the war, the family split their time between New York and London, living happily ever after. Blah, 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 shutting down my laptop for the night. I must say, I'm quite pleased with how I've told the story of my great-grandparents. Of course, I'll have to leave out the bits about potions and magic for the published version. After all, my readers prefer a straightforward love story rather than one of manipulation and subterfuge. The love story, meeting on the ship, making it big in America, is enough to sell plenty of books without outing Lady Alcott for the witch she truly was. Besides, it's better to keep certain things in the shadows. In reality, Daphne did indeed bear 4 children shortly after their marriage, triplet girls, the symbol of the Trinity, and later a boy to carry on the family name. Over the first few years in Manhattan, she became a paragon of high society, known for her impeccable femininity and fashion. It was as though she had overcompensated for once being a careless man. Lady Catherine Alcott, my great-great-grandmother, was a brilliant sorceress, and she and Daphne became as close as thieves. Rory was tragically killed in the Second Battle of the Somme in March of 1918. Family lore claims he was the last to die in the fighting, but who can say with the chaos of trench warfare? Daphne, still under the spell, was devastated and never remarried. With no male heir to manage the family business, Lady Alcott, with Daphne's help, used her powers to control influential industrialists and Wall Street financiers for the family's benefit, embedding them deeply into high society. It wasn't long before their wealth multiplied, and they oversaw a small, obscure import empire, the profits from which support my lavish lifestyle today. Most remarkably, some years ago, I stumbled upon Catherine's spellbook in the attic of our Manhattan brownstone while searching for seasonal decorations. On a whim, I read aloud the first page and was immediately startled by a tingling sensation throughout my body. I could hear my great-great-grandmother's voice urging me to study the book. With her guidance, I quickly learned small spells and potions, gradually increasing my powers. Now, I can get almost anything I want. And tonight, I plan to claim the woman laying luxuriously on our bed. I've wrapped her in the most sumptuous satin and lace nightgown from La Perla, which I'll soon remove as I ravish her body, and she'll ravish mine. She'll do anything I say. You see, it was around the time I discovered my powers that I learned my husband, Douglas, had only married me for my considerable wealth, a fact he barely denied when I confronted him. Apparently, he wasn't in it for love, and I had foolishly failed to insist on a prenuptial agreement. Rather than fight, I seduced him that night, telling him I still loved him, a little subterfuge to make him trust me. I never once caused him to doubt me, biding my time until I perfected the potion. It didn't take long to find the right moment to serve him a wonderful cup of tea. By now, I was certain I no longer cared for men, and this deceitful man needed a new perspective. Poor Doug never knew what hit him. My grandmother's tea worked perfectly. By the next day, I had Donna, my perfect spouse, hot, saucy, and completely devoted to me. She attends to me obediently, and I let her do things Doug could never have done. Plus, she's just my size, so we didn't even need to go shopping. But of course, we do. I love dressing her. My novel about turn-of-the-century immigrant love will be out by the end of the year. Not long after, we'll have our own bundle of joy. Next week, Donna is scheduled for her first artificial insemination appointment, and we couldn't be more thrilled. She'll make such a great mother, just like my great-grandmother Dorian did.